I believe there are 5 things that could possibly save Smash Bros. In 2026. Now, some of these things are less likely than others, however, I think there's hope yet for the community. I made a video last month very briefly discussing the recent history of the competitive Smash Bros. Community from 2017 and on, and so I've decided to follow up on it and go a little more in depth into what I think could really spur the community back to its former glory. But before that, how about these Joy-Cons? Are you tired of the same old boring Joy-Cons Nintendo releases? Or worse yet, have your old Joy-Cons fallen prey to Joy-Con drift? Well, worry not, because the team at YCJ has a large selection of custom-made, beautiful-looking controllers and systems. Every order from your custom Joy-Cons is built to order. Michael assembles everything, and Stephanie tests each one before it ships. You don't have to worry about any low-quality knockoff products because they only use genuine original hardware to build them, whether it's for Nintendo, Xbox, or PlayStation console. And not only that, you guys can either buy a brand new pre-made set or even build your own custom Joy-Cons from the designs and colors they have available. I personally got these sick-looking atomic purple Joy-Cons that have that retro look that Nintendo used to do with old consoles, so I think it's super awesome that YCJ is bringing the style back. They even refurbish and repair controllers, restoring them to a like-new condition. Every new controller that you buy from them include a lifetime warranty, and the consoles come with a 12-month warranty, so if there's any issue, they got you. Your Custom Joy-Cons is also active on social media and just started a blog with gaming news, builds, drops, and behind-the-scenes content in case you want an even more in-depth look into how they're made and everything they do. And the best part, if you use code YEET, you get 25% off any controller. Now that is a good deal. Make sure to use the link in the description to check them out. They got a lot of stuff to choose from. Thank you to Your Custom Joy-Cons for sponsoring this video. These Joy-Cons are actually really cool. Alright guys, so without any further ado, our first point is probably the most obvious one, but we need a new Smash Bros. Game. It is now 2026, and if we get to the end of this year, then it will have been 8 years since Smash Ultimate released, and that is kinda crazy. Now, I know some franchises have had even longer breaks, although at least those games are confirmed. Smash Bros. Is a really weird one because there's obviously just so much that goes into it since it's a game that includes characters from many franchises, and licenses and stuff are needed for things like that. Sakurai himself has mentioned that each time they made Smash, it was a miracle, which is honestly a bit disconcerting because, are we going to be able to get a 6th miracle? If we are going strictly off sales, then, of course Smash Bros. Made a lot of money, and I would also like to add the fact that many game developers would want their character in Smash. As Smash has been away, a ton of people have tried the franchises that the characters come from. Now, before I turn this into a Smash 6 speculation video, which I already did before, let's think about how it could affect the competitive scene. Things are obviously much different than they were coming up on the release of Ultimate in 2018. There wasn't any licenses required for tournaments, orgs were growing, the scene was expanding and popping off. Now, of course, scenery is much different, with most major orgs no longer involved in Smash, and big headwinds from license requirements. Now, despite this, a new Smash game would definitely not only reinvigorate smaller grassroots scenes, but bigger orgs would most likely come back to try to be a part of Smash and try to work with Nintendo. Whether any negotiations with Nintendo would actually lead to anything is questionable, although based on the fact that we almost had Panic Cup, I wouldn't completely rule it out. But, based on how things have been, it would be difficult. I will go into this a little more in depth later in the video, but the main point is that a new Smash Bros. Game would bring a huge amount of new players and viewers into the scene, incentivizing more organization and more tournaments. This leads to my second point, which is simply continued attendance and viewing of locals. Now, this by itself won't grow the scene to where it was before, but it is the best way to keep it alive, regardless of if we have a new Smash Bros. Game or not. This one is also one that I actually see happening, which is good. Maybe Smash doesn't even need a huge tournament scene, maybe it should just stick to small locals and such. Obviously, people have great memories of EVO and SmashCon, and those events were truly incredible, but at the end of the day, if you have the game and you have a group of people you enjoy playing with and hanging out with, that is the most important thing. I've gotten a good bit of comments saying that people's local scenes are thriving, and even the one I'm closest to is actually doing pretty well, so, at least we have that. But yeah, in terms of getting it back on the big stage in front of the spotlight, it really will just come down to Nintendo and large TOs. point number 3, new esports organizations. This also includes former orgs coming back. Now, again, I briefly touched on this in point number 1, but I'll just go slightly more in depth into this one. So recently in the past year or two, it's been a complete shit show. Many Smash players have left or been dropped by their former esports teams, which has continued to sully morale in the greater scene. And like I mentioned in my previous video, major tournaments seem to be taking much longer to get their licenses approved. We have Genesis coming up at least, so clearly things are going decent enough for some of the majors. But overall, it looks pretty rough. But going back to the esports teams, Luminosity was the org that was really carrying Smash for the past little while. But based on what I've seen, they have been really falling apart. Having been sold back and forth between some other companies or something, I don't even know, man. And their players and members haven't even been paid. And, so obviously that's contributed to this whole situation as well. Again, if we get a deal like Panda Global had before, that would be the biggest win. But I really doubt they will want to come back, even if the popular consensus would want them to. And with how divided people are, even that seems unfortunately like a long shot, especially with the decline in viewership in Ultimate. Again, this ties back into the first point where this would, become more relevant with the new Smash game. So really, at least in the short term, I definitely don't expect to see any resurgence in Smash and esports teams or major orgs, but I will talk about those org relationships in my last point. For my fourth point, however, and this one makes me the saddest because it really should be the easiest, but ironically is probably very difficult, is, just the community members being less divided. Unfortunately, from what I can tell on social media, people just cannot get along. Now, social media itself is not fully representative of reality and things are often exaggerated. So I will say, guys, please get off Twitter sometimes, just spend some time with people in real life. It will be very beneficial to your mental health. But regardless, there's obviously things that people talk about that are very real, and it's just crazy how much things have changed in the past 10 years. I could go into a deep conversation of how the whole world has become and how, the post-pandemic economy and everything has made life more difficult, and maybe people are more anxious from that, and, that's definitely a contributing factor. But if there's anything I would want to tell people, it would be to just try and, work together, try to understand others, be forgiving, as a lot of the things going on is affecting everyone, and becoming divided will only make things worse. I know this video won't reach a huge amount of people, but I just want to try and spread at least a little positivity. Alright, and finally for my last point, which again is a bit related with some of the other points, but if we were to see a turnaround in Nintendo's view of esports, that would probably be the biggest positive catalyst for the scene we could ever hope for. Now, I know exactly what you're thinking. This is a completely impossible scenario. Nintendo and even Sakurai see Smash Bros. As a party game for casual play, and they do not like competitive play. This is true, and this has been the case for the past 20 plus years of Smash Bros. Existence. However, I think if we look at things from a different perspective, it may be possible in the future. Now, when I say future, for me that is long term, even 20 more years, when most of us will all be old geezers. So yes, while I agree it is pretty much impossible for Nintendo to condone or even promote esports at this point in time, the fact they have tried to work with Panda and done all these things in the past few years with the competitive community shows the eventual willingness to be more open to it in the future. It's no secret that competitive Smash was absolutely enormous, and had things gone the right way, it could have been as big as Valorant, League, or Fortnite, any of those big ones. And so, it's hard to ignore the popularity, and as time goes on and the younger workers move up the ranks into the future and become executives, you'll slowly have more willingness to have more esports related things within Nintendo. The current and previous Nintendo executives obviously grew up in a much different time and they never had any competitive video games when they were younger, at least nothing to this caliber that we have today. But when our generation gets older and take those higher ranking positions in the company, without a doubt, they will be more open to esports, in my opinion, at least, Again, this is something that will take literally, 10, 20 plus years, if not more. But it's something I wanted to mention as it's not something I've heard people talk about. In addition to this point, the Japanese scene has gotten crazy big, it's been growing a lot. So I think that is also some evidence that can contribute to this. Even Nintendo, being a Japanese company, being strict with their IPs and running things strangely, I think it will slowly change over time. Obviously, I can't see the future, There's no guarantee for this, but just based on my own observations and patterns, if you stick with the competitive scene for another 20 years, maybe things will work out. You know, obviously that's not ideal, and you know, it's more gloomy than positive in a way, but these are literally just some thoughts of mine. You know, this video isn't meant to be taken super seriously. You know, since I've made my other discussion videos, I've just enjoyed talking about this stuff, you know, a bit more. Either way though, those are some of my thoughts of 5 ways I think Smash can be saved. The last one's obviously not a way it can be saved in 2026, but it's still something I thought was worth bringing up. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I will see you guys in the next one.